Happy birthday, Xander. It's me, Kevin Smith.
Happy birthday.
Happy 24th birthday. It's Christy from Vikings.
That's Cameo. In 2020, it was the fastest growing consumer startup in the world.
We went from 300,000 in GMV to 100 million in 4 years, right? Without marketing.
And that's Steven Galanis, Cameo's co-founder and CEO.
And when we had the idea for Cameo, we were leaving my grandmother's funeral.
He knew he was onto something big right away.
It spelled out in summer of probably spring of 2017, the idea that would become, a unicorn business 3 years later.
Pretty soon, he had huge celebrities and big creators making personalized videos just for their fans. And during the pandemic, it seemed like everyone was sending cameos to their loved ones. But tough times were ahead, and revenue growth slowed.
Burning tens of millions of dollars a year to be cut headcount drastically over the series of 3 rifts.
Even after slashing Cameo's valuation by 90%, Steven still managed to raise more capital. And now he has the company positioned for its next evolution. He told me about what happens when a top VC fund pursues you, what it's like when a unicorn startup has to go and do layoffs, and also what the future of Cameo looks like. This is Steven Galanis' founding journey.
I don't even want to start by talking about Cameo. There's a lot we can talk about with Cameo. We'll get into that. But first thing, I want to talk about Spartan Entertainment. So I had to double check that you didn't go to Michigan State when I saw that. You went to Duke. And from what I could see, the business sort of had sub businesses around, DJ rental equipment, party promotion, hot dog stand, I think, and a bunch of other things. And I think what I took away from that was that you really value the relationship capital that you're building with people, because you can provide different services to the same customers even as early as in college. So I think would love to understand how important that relationship capital has been from you and why that was a focus so early on in your career too.
Sure. Well, first off, thanks for having me. It was Spartan Entertainment, not because I went to Michigan State as you named, but because me and my co-founder are actually Spartans. Our families are from Sparta, Greece. My dad was born there, and my co-founder Zach's grandparents were born there. So we were real Spartans. So that's why Spartan Entertainment was at Duke University. Look, when I graduated high school, it was a really interesting time. So I was at 06 high school, 2010 college. And right around my senior year of high school, I remember at the first half of the senior year, you still needed a .edu address to even get onto the social network. And as somebody that was a senior in high school, when the guys that were freshmen in college were coming back for Thanksgiving, I remember them showing me this thing called Facebook. And it was like their favorite thing about being in college. It was really interesting. So at that time, I actually remember myself and many other classmates would apply to certain schools that were rolling admissions versus the normal like April 1st, just so you could put a deposit down somewhere to get a .edu address and get this email. But the upshot of that was that every single person that I've known basically from high school through college and then obviously in the professional world, I was connected with, which was really, really interesting. Thinking about my Greek background, I would have cousins that I would see every year when I'd go to Greece. But today, like, they know what I'm doing every day. I know what I'm doing every day because I can see their Instagram stories or I can see it's their birthday on Facebook or something like that. And what we did at that point was we created a Facebook group for Spartan Entertainment that eventually would have 17,000 college students in it from Duke, North Carolina, NC State, Elon, a bunch of the schools out there. And at that time, the bar owners or the restaurant owners or the business owners locally couldn't be on Facebook. So if you were somebody that actually could provide services and mix businesses with the students, that was extremely valuable. And we built a lot of great businesses off the back of this one network that became super trusted for providing excellent value to students and was super inclusive.
I love that. Makes sense. You see an opportunity like that arbitrage of where you can get access to people. You guys have that. The businesses don't. Super clear. An interesting thing to me when I was doing research for this was that you didn't actually then jump into entrepreneurship straight after college. You actually went and worked at LinkedIn for a little while. And I'm just curious, like, why not either continue with Spartan Entertainment or why not jump right into entrepreneurship after having this great experience while you were a student?
Well, I wanted to, but my parents didn't like the idea of me staying in college and kind of pulling a Van Wilder. But real talk, I actually, right after college, That was, if you recall, like I graduated 2010. So this was right in the middle of the 0809 financial crisis. And one of the things that was interesting was if you graduated from a Duke in '08 or earlier, it was kind of a direct path to Wall Street. So people were going to Goldman or McKinsey, pick your investment bank. And then there were 2 full years, 2009 and 2010, where just literally nobody had jobs because those banks didn't know if they were going to survive. The consulting companies were having their clients go out of business. So it was just really, really tough time in the job market. And I recall at graduation being at a dinner with like 20 of my best friends and only 2 people had jobs coming out of school. I had this great business at Spartan that I was originally going to come back and run. That summer, I went back home to Chicago and I interned on the Chicago Board of Trade on the floor. And that was kind of my first taste of a different type of world. And while it wasn't directly entrepreneurship, like trading is pretty entrepreneurial, I ended up trading for 5 years before I went to LinkedIn. And while trading, I started one of the businesses that would kind of lead me on this path towards Cameo. I started a film and movie production shingle called Blue Baron Productions with this guy named Martin, who I then would come to found Cameo with years later. And we were producing movies and television shows. And I was doing that while trading. So I was raising money from the guys that were around me in the pit. And that, so even when I was like working somewhere else, I like had an entrepreneurial bent. And obviously I had the idea for Cameo while working at LinkedIn.
Right. Makes total sense. When you and Martin were working on that company, how did you know when you had the idea for Cameo that you guys had built up enough trust as co-founders and he was the guy you wanted to go take this moonshot with?
Look, I think it goes by gut feel. Martin and I met. I remember we were producing this show called SAFE, SAF3. It's probably the worst television show that's ever been made, so nobody should ever watch it. I think on Rotten Tomatoes, it's like a 1 star. It's awful. But the idea was, what if we rebuilt Baywatch in 2013 with drones and GoPros? And Greg Bonin, the founder of Baywatch, was attached to it. My uncle and his co-founder, who were really prominent producers in Hollywood. They'd done Rambo, Conan, Lone Survivor. They were coming in. This was their first television thing. So when I had the opportunity to do that, I did it. My uncle ended up introducing me to Martin and was like, hey, if you're going to be in the entertainment business, but not move out in LA, here's a guy that's great. I've known him for years. He's kind of young and hungry like you, but I think you guys would be a good duo. We met and it was kind of an instant connection between the two of us. And that would have been in 2013, 2024. We're still working together in some capacity. So it's been an awesome ride. And my other co-founder, Devin at Cameo, was somebody that I literally recruited to my fraternity at Duke. Like I've known Devin since he was 18 years old. So I'm somebody that really values like loyalty and deep-seated high trust relationships. And while some people say don't go in business with your friends or family, like for me, I've routinely done that. I've hired people that I've worked with in the past that I know of that are coming through warm referrals. And many of the best people that I've ever worked with or worked for are those that are here. And on the flip side, like as many of the founders listening or operators know, sometimes you hire someone that you worked with in the past that it doesn't work out at the next place, or you have to fire one of your best friends or your brother. Like I've done all of that. And those are really, really painful moments. But the upside of getting it right with people you love is definitely better than the downside, at least in my experience.
Yeah, I agree. You got to be candid and honest. And that's the way to lead. I think any sort of, I've been there too, and any sort of learnings from those early companies when you were forging those relationships with the people who you know that you can trust and rely on for years to come, that sort of just emphasized that for you and made it super clear.
Yeah, I think back to Spartan and what I learned there. There were 2 things that I really, valued and lessons that I made. The way that our core business model worked was we would basically go to bars and restaurants and say, hey, we want to do an event here. We're going to take a $5 cover charge for everybody that walks in, but you get all the bar. So you don't pay us anything. We just bring a crowd to your establishment that maybe wouldn't come otherwise. And if nobody comes, we make no money. And if a lot of people come, we're going to do well, right? But if a lot of people come, you're going to do well too, because we're not taking a cut of the door. So I've always liked these kind of take rate businesses. And part of what will allow somebody to pay a cover fee, like, why are you going to pay $5 to go to this bar when you could go in free somewhere else, is like what's behind the red velvet rope has to be really special, right? It has to be a differentiated crowd, good people, great drink specials, etc. So when we got started with Spartan Entertainment, we took this bar Shooters, which today is kind of the bar most synonymous with Duke. It's like the big 1,000, 2,000 person place that you would go to the first week of school or the last week of school, or if Duke wins the national championship, they would open that place up. But it was kind of a biker bar for the most part, like a North Carolina Hell's Angel type biker bar, country bar. And all of a sudden we got them to open on Wednesday nights and bring a $3 pitcher drink special there. And the kids loved it. And it ended up, we did it on Wednesday nights because if you were an athlete at Duke, you tended to have a 48-hour rule for competition. You couldn't go out 48 hours before a game. And most games were on Saturday or Sunday. So the Wednesday for the athlete was kind of like the Friday night or the Saturday night for the average student at the school. And we ended up getting this like great crowd of college athletes that would come, and that people wanted to be at Shooters because the lacrosse guys were there and the baseball guys were there and the basketball guys were there, the hockey guys were there. And that's what kind of got it all going.
Yeah, I think finding the right people when you're starting something new is so important. And you clearly did that with Spartan, but also you did that with Cameo. I read some stories about sort of how you found those raving fans early on and who the real power super users of Cameo were going to be, who just truly loved the product. Yeah. Can you tell us about like how you found them and what you looked for that made you have the conviction in Cameo as an idea?
Well, first off, I mean, when we had the idea for Cameo, we were leaving my grandmother's funeral. Martin ended up flying in from Los Angeles to Chicago for the day for the funeral. When I went to go work at LinkedIn, Martin had actually became an NFL agent because our movie production stuff was slowing down. Netflix was changing the model. So like the same things we were doing in the past weren't going to work anymore. So we actually had kind of this 2-year period where we weren't directly working with each other every day. So we were catching up in the car. I was telling about tech and how exciting and awesome it was. You know, one thing I love about tech is it's all about growth mindset. It's all about the mission, the vision that you're building for and what's to come, not what was. And when I was when I was trading in Chicago in the pits, where there used to be 40,000 people and now there were 400 people there because technology had changed everything. And you'd look at these trading pits where hundreds of people or thousands of people used to be, and they kind of looked like craters on the moon. They were abandoned. It looked like a dinosaur graveyard. And as a 22, 23, 24-year-old down there, all the older guys were telling me, man, Steven, you should have been here in '08. You should have been here in Flash Crash. You missed the 90s. The 80s were unbelievable. It's like all the stories were about what was and nothing was about what was to come, right? Everybody kind of felt like they were like a dinosaur. And I remember having the very weird feeling as a 22-year-old saying, I want to be the last great open outcry options trader in Chicago, right? Like some 22-year-old listening to this right now doesn't believe he's going to be the last great tech entrepreneur, right? It was kind of a weird thing when we thought about it. And for Martin, as an NFL agent, his particular idea, like why he thought, here's this guy from Brighton, England that never has played a down of football before and speaks with a funny accent. Like, why was someone going to sign with him over Drew Rosenhaus or the biggest agents in the world? And he really believed in this connection between sports and entertainment. So he felt like if he could sign a big kind of action hero like looking guy, maybe he could find the next Jason Momoa or he could find the next Rock and take those guys and put them into big action movies. And Martin found this guy named Cassius Marsh. He was a mid-round draft pick out of UCLA, defensive end, all tatted up, big buff guy. He's got a great, really, you look at him and he just kind of looks like he could be like a superhero. And Martin signed him. And because he wasn't a starter, he couldn't get any endorsement deals for this player. And he was telling me about one situation in particular where Cassius, who's an avid Magic the Gathering fan, had actually had his car broken into during the season. And somebody stole this designer bag with like $40,000 worth of Magic the Gathering cards. So he actually tweeted out, hey, 12s, I don't know what he thought was in the bag, money, jewels, whatever. But what was in that was actually more important to me than any of those things. Like, I just want my cards back. I won't press charges. Like, help me get them back. So this goes viral. It's on Barstool. It's on PTI. Like, everybody's talking about this big defensive lineman kind of crying that his cards got lost. And that was a moment that made Magic the Gathering viral, right? Like Magic the Gathering is not something that's trending on Twitter particularly often because of its connection with the NFL. And Martin tried to get Wizards of the Coast, is what the parent company is called, that's Seattle based, to basically say like, hey, we have a Seattle Seahawk, this really popular player that like loves your thing. Is there a deal we can do? Can you guys pay him to come to some convention in Vegas or play card shows or give him a deck? And Martin couldn't get a deal out of them. Like they had no interest. And it's because Cassius was not a superstar, right? If it was what Russell Wilson or Marshawn Lynch, they would have been all over it. But because he wasn't super famous, it showed us that there was this gap between kind of like fame and the ability to monetize. Like him being on the Seahawks made him popular. He had tens of thousands of followers on Twitter, but it didn't mean that there was a way to monetize that. So this was a really interesting problem that he was having. And he pulled out his phone to me and he's like, but Steven, look, this guy's a star. And in the video that he showed me, Cassius is shirtless. He's driving down in Southern California. He's got a flat brimmed shirt. He's got no top on. And he literally is filming this video and he goes, hey, Brandon, it's Cassius Marsh from the Seahawks. Heard about your son, Maverick. If he gets your athletic ability, he'll be playing for the Seahawks one day. Go Hawks. And Martin shows me this selfie style video and I'm looking at it and I'm like, wait, who's Brandon? What was this for? And then he's like, oh, Brandon's my buddy who is like very high up in Nike's marketing department. He just had a son and he loves the Seahawks. So I got Cassius to record a video congratulating him. Immediately I saw that and like it was the eureka moment. I'm like, Martin, forget trying to get him in a movie or get him a deal with Wizards of the Coast. Like we should sell those. So so I ended up dropping him off. We were stuck in traffic on the way to O'Hare when we had the idea. I dropped him off. He went through security. He calls me right away. I get on the next flight to LA the next day. We then spend a day at Soho House in West Hollywood and just start kind of dreaming up what this marketplace could be, like the idea that would become Cameo. We really felt like for X amount of money, you should be able to pay to do Y activity with Z person. So that could be like go to dinner with them or have a phone call with them or meet them in real life or have them play your wedding. Like we had all these ideas. And Martin and I can't code, right? We're both non-technical founders. We both have big Rolodexes. We both are kind of your like classic go-to-market, run through walls type people. We were just two guys with an idea. So at this point, we have this idea. We know we could have something, but we have no one to build it. At that point, I started thinking about my network and who I knew. And at this point, like I worked at LinkedIn, but our Chicago office, there were no technical people in the whole office. It was just salespeople. So I really didn't know like a single software engineer, at least for my professional career, but a few of my classmates from Duke I knew were talented engineers and had been working on startups and doing things like that. So I called one of them. His name was Devin, and Devin would go on to become our third co-founder and our technical co-founder. And really the only reason why Cameo exists today and why it wasn't just an idea in two guys' heads. And he did an amazing job to help us solidify this idea. And instead of this big marketplace where you could pay any amount of money to do anything with anyone, it was like, let's make personalized video messages for football players, right? It kind of started with NFL and then we would move on to different sports verticals. And then next thing you do, Devin, who was actually an early star on Vine, he had over 1 billion loops on Vine. One day was like, hey, I think like my roommate, Cody Ko, who's got over 10 million followers on YouTube, and people like Cody might do well on this thing. So then we started finding some of the old Vine stars and YouTubers. And it's really when we hit those folks that like we found product market fit.
Wow, that's a crazy story. I guess, how did you know that there were more people? Maybe you didn't know. Maybe it was just, hey, let's get out there, let's test it. But did you have any inclination that there'd be more people like Cassius, or also more people like the people who'd want those videos from Cassius? And like,
we knew for sure that there were a lot of Cassiuses out there. And I think part of this was our backgrounds, like going to Duke. Martin went to USC. He was a D1 athlete there, played football on those Matt Leinart, Reggie Bush era teams. So he saw guys, and Devin and I were at Duke in 2010 when we won the national championship. Like we all had great friends that were like selling out the Los Angeles Coliseum or selling out Cameron Indoor Stadium. And then 6 months later, after they win a national championship, they're like working at their high school as a parapro, right? Like there was no NIL back then. Athletes couldn't get paid. And there was a documentary on ESPN called Broke, where they talked about how 5 years after playing their last game 85% of NFL players are broke, right? So this was a problem. Not forget all the people that were famous, that were really famous for what they did in college as athletes, but didn't make it to the pros. Even those that make it, the vast majority of them aren't going to have enough money to sustain themselves. And I saw this at LinkedIn where there was a really prominent former Chicago Bears player, a guy that had played in the league for, I think, 13 years. And he was now retired and he was trying to pivot into wealth management. And I was working with him to build his professional Rolodex up and how do you leverage LinkedIn and LinkedIn Sales Navigator to take all these relationships you had and find the people that went to Wake Forest that were CEOs. And you could I was teaching people that. And the tough thing is if you're an athlete, you spend your whole life trying to do this thing and everybody tells you can't do it. When you're in high school, they're like, you're never going to make college. And then when you're in college, you're never going to make the pros. So they all think that the stats don't apply to them because they've always been the ones that did it. And then all of a sudden most of us, we make more money kind of every year in our professional career. But as athletes, you go to the NFL right now and your starting salary is $600,000. And once you're done with that, it's going to take you a long time to find anything that would pay close to it. So it just ends up being hard where it's tough to go from winning a Super Bowl then to becoming an SDR at some SaaS company. We truly believe that there was a widening gap between fame and monetization. And one of the big theses that I think collectively the founders had at Cameo was that there are more famous people in the world today than there were yesterday. And technology was creating more every day. So, TikTok, every single day, there's new stars getting made. But the underlying business models but talent's growing exponentially. TikTok, YouTube, SoundCloud. If you're a musician, you could just put your own music out. You used to need to get signed before you were on the radio. Now it's opposite. If you're a creator, someone like Cody Ko, right? 10 million followers on YouTube. Cody spent years in LA going to every audition, trying to get cast in something. Nobody ever cast him in anything. And guess what? He started making his own videos. He got popular. He developed a following. So he gets to be the producer. He gets to be the director. He gets to be the casting agent. He's not relying on somebody else gatekeeping and saying, yeah, you're the one or you're not the one. So that's changed a ton. And when you look at the underlying business models of sports, of entertainment, of the creator economy, they're all very heavily skewed to the top 1%. So in music, the top 1% of musicians make 95% of all the streaming revenue on Spotify. On YouTube, the top 3% of creators make 97% of all the ad revenue on the platform. In sports, the top 1% of athletes make 99% of all the endorsement dollars. In the Screen Actors Guild, 99.9% of the Screen Actors Guild is unemployed at any given time. And during the strike last year, there were some stats that said 86% of the Screen Actors Guild doesn't make enough money to pay for their health insurance, which you only need to make $20,000, $24,000 or something like that to qualify for your health insurance from them. So we realized this was already a problem in the system. The system was already broken for a lot of these folks, but because of technology, the stresses on the system were going to be more than ever, right? There's now more mouths to feed. There's an exponentially growing amount of mouths to feed that are being supported by a business model that's growing linearly, if it's growing at all. The music industry the record labels are not making more money than they were 20 years ago, and the movie studios aren't making more. The game has changed, and there's so much stress on the system. And our belief was that it had to be direct to fan monetization. That had to be the only way that you could bridge this gap between how much fame's in the world and fans' willingness to support.
I worked at Uber and Airbnb. I know the marketplace business model very well. And I think whenever you're starting a marketplace, you have the chicken and egg problem. You have the cold start problem, right? I think when you guys have that opportunity, you're like, okay, there's an opportunity here. There's more of these people doing this thing, just like with Uber and Airbnb in the early days. There's that appetite to do the thing the platform was enabling. When you see that, how do you capture it? How do you make sure that both sides of the marketplace can grow?
We have a really unique marketplace insofar as our supply side are famous. They have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of followers on X, on Instagram, on Snap, on whatever platform, TikTok, whatever platform they're using. So unlike a driver in Uber that joins, our supply can beget their own demand. And that's a really interesting part of our flywheel. So the way that Cameo works was we would go and get somebody new to come on the platform. we'd give them a link, cameo.com/their username. We would then tell them to tweet that link out, which would drive people to their direct booking page. We never told people to promote Cameo itself but we told people, like, let your fans know, right? The best way to get to your fans is if you share it, like, that's going to be better than anything we can do. And our business model makes sense because you make 3 times as much as we do from every video. So if you win, we win, right? And we're going to create the tools to make it so easy for you to do this, to connect with your fans, to build deeper relationships, to be supported by them. And because we're going to aggregate a bunch of talent that are going to share disparate networks. And one thing we didn't know when we started, but we found out to be true pretty quickly, is that most of these are bought as gifts, right? So 80+% of cameos are bought for other people. So if what may end up happening is your girlfriend might follow one of the Real Housewives, come to the page, and then find someone on the Chicago Bears that, like, you would like. And that's kind of how the marketplace works. So it's a rising tide that lifts all boats, and the network effects were pretty apparent quickly.
What are those tactical things that you did, you said, to make it as easy as possible for them to bring their audience over? What were those things you guys did early on?
I mean, the link in bio thing was huge, right? Like, now when you think of link in bio, you think of Linktree, you think of others. But we were kind of the first company that I was aware of that was really pushing, like, hey, you have this link in your Instagram bio, put it there. Or right when we started, Instagram swipe ups were a new feature, right? So you couldn't post a link in a story before that. So there were just a lot of these tactics that ended up being really important from us from a distribution perspective. And the other thing that we realized right away was that there's this inherent, like, K factor in every Cameo video, right? So I buy for you, like, I send you the video, then you're going to show it to a bunch of people. There's a watermark on it, right? So we would always say every Cameo becomes a commercial for the next one. And for us, we've always tried to maintain, even though we don't directly, like, oversee the quality of the video in the marketplace, we've always said that we want content that's good enough to share, right? Because if you get a Cameo and it's not, if I buy a Cameo for you and I don't like it that much and I don't send it to you, like, it's so costly, because if I have a great one that you send and then you send it to all the people, you put it on your Twitter, you send it to all your friends, it goes in a group chat, suddenly there's like hundreds or thousands of people that are seeing every single order that got made. And that's one of the things that really got our flywheel going.
Yeah, I think we used a Cameo at Launch House, my last company, to promote what we were doing early on, promote our membership offer early on. And it worked really well. People would share it. It went viral on social media. That strategy works really well. One thing you'd mentioned was the eureka moment. I want to go back to that for a second. So a lot of people will say that you can find a great startup idea just by iterating. In some cases, it happens and it just hits you all at once. I think for you guys, it sounds like it hit you. There's that lightning moment, and then you sort of got out there and started iterating from there. Would you say that that is an essential part of finding a unicorn idea, like a truly venture scale idea, is having that moment?
It's interesting, right? Because when I saw this video that Martin showed me, and he told me that this guy who's an executive at Nike put it on Instagram and said it was the best gift he'd ever gotten in his life. And this guy works with LeBron and Kyrie and Michael Jordan. And here he is, like, talking about a backup player on a team he loves, and saying that's the best thing he ever got. That was, like, really, really surprising to me. And when we sold our first Cameo ever, I remember this dad ended up filming his daughter's reaction to it. And she literally started crying. She was so happy. And there was something, like, so visceral about the feeling that you got when you got a Cameo, or you saw it. And even if you didn't know who the video was for, or who the person was, you just knew it was a wow moment. It was special. I remember, like, I'm 36, but I remember going to bar mitzvahs when I was in middle school, and the Bulls, this was still like the Michael Jordan Bulls era. And, Tony Kukoc or Ron Harper would, like, pop up in some kid's bar mitzvah montage. And that was such a wow moment. So it's not that this was a new idea, but the technology on how to, like, make this thing that you could only get a Cameo video in the past if, like, you happen to know the agent or you ran into them and you had the courage to say hi and they were willing to do it. It was so impossible. And suddenly this made it so frictionless, right? And that was the thing that made it special. But, like, I remember when I had the idea, then I go back to LinkedIn and I'm telling people, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? just like anyone else, there are people that were like, that's a great idea. There were a lot of people like, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. And one thing that I think is really interesting, and I've seen happen over and over again, the people that were like closest to the industry were the ones that were most certain this could never work. And the thing that's interesting about like me, Martin, and Devin is like Devin was an agent, but he had one player, right? If he was Ari Emanuel, there's no way he would have done all the things needed to make this work. And Devin was a coder, but if he was Steve Wozniak, like, and he had built Apple or something like that, he wouldn't have put the time in to make it needed. So we all had the skill sets in retrospect that could allow us to be world-class, but none of us had achieved at a world-class level yet. I had been a CEO before of this business in college, but if I was Jeff Weiner, I wouldn't have been killing myself to make this work. So there's just something about having the hunger and still not having achieved at that level yet. As a first-time founder, like we always hear about like why second or third-time founders work, right? You know who to hire, but like we didn't have industry experience. Like we weren't scared. And this is something that's been interesting is we built Cameo. We're headquartered in Chicago. People don't know that. A lot of people think it's LA, it's New York, but our whole business was built with like people that never worked in the entertainment business before, that weren't clouded by, oh, I can't reach out to this person because this was my mentor's client and he's going to be mad at me and I'm going to get blackballed. Like nobody cared about that. We were just a bunch of kids from the Midwest that were like, hey, this person would be great to get on Cameo. I'll reach out to anyone. And if they say no, no is the same as the reality right now, which is that they're not on the platform.
Yeah, I love that. You gotta be scrappy. It's actually the same philosophy that, I think Renaissance Technology took with hedge funds originally. They didn't hire any finance people. They hired math PhDs and physics PhDs, right?
We didn't hire a lot of, too many math PhDs, but it is the same idea.
I think you guys recently brought more capital into the company too, right?
Yeah, we did.
That tells me that you guys still see some significant upside in terms of where things can go from here. Is the strategy to build out the product more? Like when you guys are so later stage, how do you think about bringing new capital into the company at that point?
Look, part of it was we needed to. We had been burning a lot of money. If we didn't, we wouldn't exist today. We had investors that were really excited about the upside of the business and like what it could be. But part of it was we had to make some really difficult decisions to make the business fundable again. We cut headcount drastically over the series of 3 rifts. Like that's very public. What people don't know under the hood is that this business has been profitable for most of the last year. And going from a business that was burning tens of millions of dollars a year to building an EBITDA positive business was really difficult, but we're excited about it because at this point, as a profitable business, we really own our own destiny again, which was not something that you can really do when you're on the venture train. You can do it as you keep hitting your milestones, but the second you're not hitting those, then all of a sudden you've got a mountain of pref stack sitting on top of you. You've got investors that are unhappy because they came in at a higher price. And ultimately, at the end of the day, like those were factors that had nothing necessarily to do with the quality of the business. Should this thing exist? Is it bringing happiness to the world? One thing that I'll tell you is like our company's 90% smaller in headcount than it was at the peak, but our customers and our talent didn't care. The constituents that we care most about in the marketplace never cared about how many people were working for them, as long as they were still being able to get their cameos or have a great experience making videos on the platform. And ultimately, like by one of the things that's so interesting, like from the first build up of Cameo to the rebuild and what's different, I really believe like when you're on that venture train, you raise a big round and you want to talk about how many people you're going to hire, what you're going to add. And my senior leadership team right now, our operating goal is to double the head. Like we wanted 10x the valuation of the company before we double headcount again. That's so different than let's raise $50 million and hire 150 people.
Yeah. It's also different environments too, right?
The game changed, right? When we were a Series A company, Reid Hoffman wrote a book called Blitzscale that was kind of the Bible for the times, right? And the whole idea was raises for world-changing ideas that it's a winner-take-all market or winner-take-most. And what you need to do if you're, especially in a consumer marketplace business, and Uber was an example of this, Airbnb, Groupon, all these companies, is you need to raise as much money as you can, as quickly as you can to get as big as you can. So then ultimately you crowd out the market. And we ran the blitzscaling playbook. we ran it to the T. We did the things that we were supposed to do. We hired the world-class management team. We brought in exceptional leaders from top tech companies. We hired really well. We hired great people. Like there was so much that happened, but ultimately for us, like our core business slowed down when the second vaccine came out and less people started coming to Cameo every day. And it didn't matter that we had a world-class team that was almost public company ready from have the right people in place, the right leaders, the right processes, all that. The underlying business couldn't afford that anymore. And frankly, what we realized through a series of 3 super painful riffs was each time we would do a riff, I remember being in these meetings with my executive team, and you're on the spreadsheet. Should we keep this person or that person? And people constantly telling me, there's no way we could have less people than this. The business won't function. I'll tell you, on riff 1, I was told that. And on riff 3, when we went from 185 people to 35 people, I had a board that was like, you're going to be a zombie company. There's no way that Cameo can survive. You're never going to grow again. And guess what? We made the cuts. We made some product changes. We shipped one thing that worked really, really well. And the business was 30% bigger last Christmas than it was the Christmas before, with 80% less people.
Want to get more insights like that? Each week, I actually interview multiple founders. For the ones who don't join the podcast, I write up a case study and share it with all founding journey members. I also write weekly tactical deep dives, share startup opportunities, and analyze trends that I'm noticing. We've also got a community of founders, an investor and pitch deck database, and more fun stuff like over $60,000 in perks and discounts to help you build, grow, and raise capital for your startup. Go to join.foundingjourney.com to get access.
Wow. Dang. That's actually really impressive. I've been there too. My last company, we were hitting all our milestones. We raised a bunch of money. We're growing revenue. And then we had a crisis and things fell apart and we had to reduce headcount. I ended up leaving the company. In those situations, it's super hard to kind of stay mentally even keel. You never want to be too high or too low as a founder, but those situations really kind of put you in that tough spot. How do you handle that when you're going through all those riffs?
Well, it fucking sucks, right? It's the worst thing you can do because the people, whether they're on the keep list or the cut list, like these are people you recruited and you mentored and they've given their all. And when they've left great businesses to come to work for you, or they chose not to leave for some amazing opportunity because they believed in your vision as the CEO and the founder, like that's the cross that we bear, right? When we make miscalculations, that our mistakes cost people jobs, right? At the end of the day, as founders. And then for those how you treat those on the way out, that's really important too, because if you're not as generous as you can be from a severance perspective, or you're not opening your network up to try to place people, then suddenly the people that are still there are like, hey, does this leader have my back? So there's so much that needs to be done to rebuild the culture. And look, frankly, we went through 2 years of hell, but I'm happy to report, we just had our all company Cameo Palooza, which we do Palooza every year. We bring everyone to come, and we just moved into our new headquarters, and we're fresh off funding, and we've recapped the business, and we've given people, they got new equity grants. And it's if you're at Cameo today, it's kind of like being at a unicorn with Series A upside. And the people that are here, they've had a million opportunities to leave, right? We basically had 2 years where things weren't going well, and there's rifts happening, and people that are leaving the company that are stars, and they're going somewhere else. And they're calling the best people in our company saying, hey, come over here. The grass is greener. The water's warm. And I'm so grateful to those that have stuck it out with us. And they've been a huge part of this turnaround. And ultimately, when we get to the outcome that we're building towards, they're going to be handsomely rewarded for sticking it out.
That's all you can ask for out of a leader, is that kind of belief and loyalty in the people who stick around. It really breeds confidence. And, I'd bet on a team like that. I think the company that I'd been building was sort of like a pseudo accelerator in a way. We had a membership offer. We'd bring founders together for cohorts, and we'd invest in them out of our venture fund. And you actually did an accelerator pretty early on too, right? Back in Chicago. You guys were part of, 1871, right?
It still exists. And it was, especially when I was there pre-COVID, it was really pretty special and differentiated kind of in the world. When I got there, there were about 2,000 people working on 500 companies all in one space together. So it was community. It was the whole city behind you, basically. It was all the big Fortune 500s, partnered with universities, partnered with the best mentors from the big tech companies in town. And it just kind of was this really special ground zero place. And there's some excellent companies that have come out of that. Obviously, as COVID changed a lot, right? When they try to move that remotely, like the physical footprint of the place isn't as big. People don't come in as much. It's not, there's so many more, I don't know, just distributed work has just made physically gathering places for a time period there, like less interesting than it used to be or less essential. Like you can do meetups online now. You don't have to like go but ultimately it was really, really special. And it was special enough that if 1871 didn't exist, like I would have never built Cameo in Chicago. Like my two co-founders were in LA. I was the one that was here learning from other entrepreneurs, like telling my pitch 10 times a day, every day, and talking to other founders. And that was happening here while my co-founder, Devin, was building the app, what would become Cameo in Venice. And Martin was running around Hollywood trying to get people to join, right? And I was in Chicago learning how to run a tech company.
I think obviously you know how to run a tech company now, right? And so the question is, down the road, if you were to start another company at some point, right? Do you think that type of experience where you're in that tight space with other founders also building early stage things, is that valuable enough where you think you would do it again? Or is it really something that people should just do sort of once to get that boot camp when they're starting out as founders?
Look, I think there's always value in, I'm a people person. Like my nickname since kindergarten has been the mayor, right? It's not an accident that Cameo or Spartan Entertainment were the businesses that I started. So I personally just love being around other founders, and I derive a lot of energy from that. And I moved to Miami a few years ago, and one thing I loved there was all of these like world-class founders that kind of all came to Miami at the same time. They were getting co-working spaces together. They're working out of each other's houses. Every night you're at dinner with them. And I just love that sense of community. At this point, it'd probably be more likely like I would have a space and I would invite people to come to it than I would like show up at a WeWork or something like that. And honestly, even in the new Cameo HQ, one of the things that was really important to me was to have space for founders that are out of town coming to Chicago. If they want to work out of our office, like they can, right? Because we wanted to have this place that's kind of the coolest place you could be in Chicago and have it be accessible to anyone in our network to use.
Yeah, that makes sense. You can create your own at this point. I think another thing that is like sort of evidence of this value that you put on relationship capital is how you recommend people interact with investors. I read something that you said founders should spend 5 to 10% of their time every week sort of doing some sort of investor conversation, even if they're not fundraising right now, right? Do you think that that's like a universal truth, or is that more true in maybe a weaker funding environment like we've been in for the last year or two?
Look, I think it's universally true. There's some founders that are kind of natural born fundraisers, and there's others that like want to avoid it like the plague and don't want to spend one moment on it. In my experience, like keeping people updated constantly and meeting new people, your pipeline just gets bigger and bigger and bigger the more people that are aware of what you're doing. And frankly, if you've talked to someone over a longer period of time, they're going to have more conviction than this was like, I don't know. It's kind of like if you're single and you only take one girl out when you're like, I want to get married, and you like go take someone on a date that day, like it's either going to work out or not. But if you're single and you're constantly out, you're meeting people, you're talking to, and you just have more options, like that's going to help you find the person that's like actually right for you, because you like know what you like, what you don't like. You see like why they would be a fit, and you're not trying to squeeze around square peg in a round hole.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the point about some people sort of loving that versus some people wanting to just sit down and write the code makes sense. I think, would you recommend, even if you're not that type of person who loves getting out there, doing the sales, doing the fundraising, that you kind of force yourself to? And like, what would you recommend to somebody who's trying to do that?
If you can't do it, then make sure you have a co-founder that, or someone at the company that is willing to do that. You know, my two co-founders, they don't talk to investors. They're not interested in it. They don't want to go to pitch meetings. They don't it's just not what they like to do. And to be honest, like we divided up the world really great. Hey, Martin, you go get the talent. Devin, you go make sure that the product works, and I'll go do all the shit in the middle, right? So making sure, and one of my favorite venture capitalists who's out of Atlanta actually has this saying for consumer founders, and he said all the best teams I've ever backed in consumer have these three traits in their founders. Now, some founders could have all three, but more often than not, it's like there's 2 or 3 founders and they have the 3 traits between them. These consumer teams need the hustler, the hacker, and the hipster. You need the hustler to just run through walls and take some, like, bend reality and make something happen that just you find a way to do it. And for us, that was Instagram DMing being the huge unlock for how we got around agents and talent. And we built a team of dozens of people that were DMing celebrities on Instagram all day. That's how we built our pipeline. The hacker is someone that's finding some new and novel way to do it. And Devin built this platform where on the app, there's a teleprompter and it says, you say yes or no if you want the video. If you say yes, a teleprompter opens up on something that looks like Snapchat, and you can nail the video every time because you're not going to forget what it says. And then the hipster, they have to know what's going to be cool in the future, right? In consumer. And one of the examples I use of this, when we started Cameo, the Instagram highly polished design aesthetic was the dominant aesthetic out there.
Yep.
But, what has transformed over last year is you now have authentic being more important than high quality. Yep. And we hit that on the head from the beginning. I remember sitting in 1871 with some of the best consumer internet advisors and media people, big Leo Burnett, advertising folks that were in Chicago helping. And they were like, the only way this will work is if you rent the celebrities out for a day at the time. You have you have the right lighting, and it's got to be high production or people are never going to pay for it. But we realized that people like the raw authenticity of it being on their cell phone. And that was something that made Cameo particularly special from the beginning.
How do you think that you can get investors to sort of give you the time of day early on if you're not fundraising, if you're trying to just build those relationships? Investors are seeing tons of pitches. They're focused on getting a return for LPs. How do you get them to give you the time of day if you're not actively raising?
Well, I think first off is this is something that just happens kind of over time. So in the earliest days, when I was at 1871, you would have someone that anyone that said they were a venture capitalist, they'd sponsor drinks one day. Go talk to them, go meet them, tell them what you're doing. If they're interested and they're let's get lunch or coffee one day, go follow up. In my experience, one thing I'll say is that VCs very often they are salespeople, right? They're great hunters. And when they see something that they want, they're going to go and pursue you. And that's why a lot of founders that maybe aren't the best salespeople in the world, they end up getting funded or they build great businesses because the idea is that good or that there's something so compelling about the tech that they're building or what they're working on. From my experience, it's when you get those opportunities, take advantage of them. And one of our values at Cameo is make it memorable, right? I can remember the best founders I've ever met. I remember the first time I met them. I remember being blown away by their passion or them telling me something crazy about how the world was going to change. And then I would go home and think about it. And on the flip side, there's other people that you could throw them in the room with all the right people ever. They could have the best idea and they just can't articulate it. So to me, it's be super memorable, be someone that sticks out from the crowd, be someone that person's not going to stop thinking about when they go home that night and that they want to pursue and they want to hear more.
I love that. Yeah. Be memorable yourself, do something interesting,
but also be authentic, right? It's too hard to do this that if you have to pretend to be someone else, right? To get a check from someone or them to invest in you, it's just not worth it, right? It's so hard. They always talk about your venture partners it's a marriage. It's a 10-year journey together. And if you fool them over a 3-week period because you pretend to be something you're not, that's not going to be good for either side.
That's true. You obviously have done a really good job of building those connections with investors to the point of you've been able to tell stories without needing a pitch deck, right? I think early on, I read that you guys even raised the Series B without a pitch deck. We didn't have a deck for our first few rounds either. But Series B, that's genuinely pretty impressive. So how'd that come about? How'd that happen?
Part of it was and again, I think this is really unique to consumer. When you have something in consumer that's just working, the reality is when I'd go into these pitch meetings, the first 5-10 minutes of all these, I'd be at the best firms on Sand Hill Road, and the partners would spend the first 10-15 minutes of my pitch showing me their cameos that they bought or why it was so awesome. So yeah, that helps, right? When people know your product. And the other thing too is that Cameo gets called like kind of a COVID like growth story. And we grew a lot during COVID. But what people don't know is that if you go back on those Andreessen Horowitz marketplace reports from 2019, 2018, Cameo was the fastest or one of the fastest growing consumer marketplaces in the world in 2018 and 2019 before 2020. We went from 300,000 in GMV to 100 million in 4 years without market expense. So that is the type of thing that like when you have numbers like that and you have a product that makes people feel a certain way and it's got virality, that's why you can do it. If I had any other company, I'm sure I would have had to have a pitch deck at the pre-seed round.
Do you think there are benefits of, as a founder, just sitting down and creating a deck or even like a Notion memo, even if your startup is super hot? Do you think there's value in that?
For sure. And while I say I have no deck, I actually do have a deck that I made when I was sitting at 1871. It's probably the worst pitch deck you'll ever see in your life. But forget the graphic design, which is terrible. The idea that would become Cameo is crystal fucking clear in that deck. And that was for me. That wasn't for anybody else. This is not something I took to an investor or anything, but it was just me putting my ideas on paper. And I literally am using clip art and Arial font. Like, it's horrendous. But if you forget about if you look at the substance of it, as opposed to like the cosmetic, does this look pretty or not? It's spelled out in probably spring of 2017, the idea that would become a unicorn business 3 years later.
Yeah, I think there's something to the idea that the ugliest decks tend to be the best. It's not universally true, but I do see that more often than not. If someone's just got...
They always say like the best idea is the good idea that looks like a bad idea. Right? So if your deck looked shitty and it was shitty, then you never heard about that company. So it just went away. And there's probably a lot more of the bad decks. There's probably a lot more that were bad decks with bad ideas. Right. But there's also I've seen a lot of, frankly invested in a lot of great looking decks that ended up being bad ideas. So, but at least, hey, if you were able to make this great deck and have this compelling vision, maybe it's going to work, maybe it's not, but at least you're being thoughtful. Like, I do think it is rare to have the ugly deck with the good idea. But again, that part of the reason this also happened is that every single round of funding we've ever done came inbound. Like we never, until this last round that we did, we've never had like a formal, like we're going to run a process and like do this. I would constantly be meeting with people. They get exciting. And next thing they know, there's a term sheet and now it's off to the races. So that was something really unique about our fundraising journey. And that's why I tell people, just because I did it this way, it doesn't mean that it's a way you could do it again, especially as a first time founder, like out of Silicon Valley. Like there were it was just a crazy, weird, wild ride of how a Lightspeed found out about us or how Kleiner found out about us. Like Andrees, like the stories are amazing and fun, and I'll share them all one day. But it all comes down to, do you have product market fit? Like, do you have something that people really want and need and love and can't stop sharing with their friends and talking about in consumer, right? Like, it's just different.
Any of those stories, even just one, you could share with us today?
I'll tell you one of my all-time favorite stories is how our Series A got done. So we had this amazing angel investor named Jana Masser-Schmidt, and Jana was one of the early women execs at Twitter, and she started this group called #Angels that was like the top female execs from Twitter that wanted to like angel invest and do things together. We had just raised our pre-seed round, and somehow she found out about Cameo really early. She DM'd me on Twitter kind of every day until I responded. It was like days and days and days in a row. And finally, she's like, I know you think I'm crazy, but like, we need to talk. And she ends up talking to me and investing in the business. Turns out she's from Central Illinois, and she like actually randomly worked at a bar that my family owned. And like, there was just all these connections, but she loved Cameo and she was obsessed with the idea. And I ended up letting her write a small seed check into the business and small angel check into the business. And then maybe a few months later, she ends up calling me and said, "Hey, I just met Jeremy Liu from Lightspeed he was at my house in Malibu and I just showed him Cameo and he loves it. Is it cool if I put you guys on email together?" And at this point, we'd raised our seed round. We had drawn this spreadsheet that was just kind of an evergreen spreadsheet that we worked with our seed investors that basically ranked like not just every venture firm, but like every partner at every firm. And the highest level was if it was a 5 out of 5 fit and like a 5 out of 5 partner, or there's like a 5A, right? Which was like this is like an A+ firm and like the A+ partner. And there were only a handful ahead of this, I remember at the time, that were on that list. It was Matt Kohler from Benchmark, who had done like Instagram. It was Reid Hoffman. Like there were like a few names. And Jeremy Liu was one of the 5 or 6 names total that were ranked 5A. And I get an email from Jeremy and he goes, "Hey, Steven, I just found out about Cameo. This is genius. Where are you in the world? We're having breakfast tomorrow." And I happened to be in San Francisco because I was meeting with YouTube for something. And I told him, "Let's meet me." We ended up meeting for coffee at the Battery. I thought it was going to be a 15-minute meeting. I start my pitch. I'm like 30 seconds in. He goes, "Steven, no. I've been looking for this type of business for 10 years. Let me explain to you why like me and Lightspeed are the perfect partners for you." We end up talking for 2-3 hours. I have to fly to a wedding in Los Angeles. I literally am like, "Jeremy, I'm about to miss this wedding." It was Labor Day weekend. So I had to make this flight or I was going to miss the rehearsal dinner. And he basically goes, "Hold on one second." And he gets on a phone call. He comes back and he goes, "All right, Steven, when you land, you're on American Airlines. You're going to land at gate 43. I want you to walk over to the United Terminal, which is at LAX, which is gate 71. And there you're going to meet my partner, Nicole Quinn, at this coffee shop right there." So I literally like get on a plane. I land. I have this meeting in the airport with Nicole Quinn. We talk. We have mutual friends. She loves the business. She's been doing a bunch of celebrity stuff with Lady Gaga and Reese Witherspoon and others. And it's kind of like love at first sight. We have just this amazing rapport. And then she's like, "All right, I'm going to come see you on Tuesday." So that was back in Chicago. So Tuesday morning, 9 o'clock in the morning, she's in the office, spends the day with the team. At the end of the day, we go and I think we got a meal or a drink or something. And she's like, "Hey, this is awesome. I'd love you to come meet the rest of my partners and back in the Valley on Monday." So I then show up at this partner meeting at Lightspeed. It's just me. I think I just hired a CFO. And it was the two of us that go out there. We didn't have a deck. We had no model. We had nothing. And we're in this partner meeting with 50 people in Lightspeed in person. And then all around the Zoom, the people in Israel, the people in their other offices. And we start getting into our pitch. And at the end of that meeting, we go in. I have no idea how well it went. Like I thought it was interesting. And we're sitting in this conference room and Jeremy and Nicole walk in. And keep in mind, Jeremy was the first check in Snapchat. And he goes, "Steven, it's unanimous. The partners, Lightspeed, we'd love to lead your Series A. And our belief is that Cameo is Snapchat, but better because Instagram can't copy it because of the moats that you built. And we think you're building a business that's going to change the world." And when you have a partner like with conviction like that is, I always give that the story of like when VCs like go and chase a hot deal, like they went, and there were 10 other things that happened that week when I was in the Valley. Then all of a sudden my investors are like, "Shit, you got a term sheet from Lightspeed. Well, we need to go and meet everybody else. So go meet Greylock, go meet Andreessen, go meet Kleiner and Sequoia." And like, we could go run this process. We end up with 5 term sheets in the next 4 days. But ultimately, like the reason I went with Lightspeed was the conviction that they had. And I love telling that story because that's the difference between chasing a VC that you had a great pitch with and then 3 days later, "Hey, following up, do you need this?" Like when they want it, they know how to get it. And the thing is there's so many shots on goal that happens that for that week, right? There might have been it might have been that they missed Figma that week because they're chasing Cameo, right? So as a founder, you should never take it personally that investor that you really want, like might be distracted or isn't getting you back to you It's just that you're not their first love. You're not the one that they want to marry that week.
Wow. Let that be a lesson to anyone who's listening and has tried to fundraise or has even fundraised successfully. Now you know exactly what it looks like when partners are so all in on something and have so much conviction, and you are, as you said, the one they want to marry. That's amazing.
Yeah. And I think, look, when you're making a 10-year decision, like who's going to be on your board, it's important that there's that passion for the business coming in. And the reason my Series B got done so well is Nicole Quinn, once she joined the board, she was the best cheerleader for Cameo, and we were kicking ass for beating our numbers. And she made sure that everyone in the Valley that could lead our B knew it. And then that led to an inbound Series B process. So that's why I just spent a lot of time for all these funds. And it's interesting because I'm an LP in a lot of funds. I've been invested over the course of 8 years by so many of the top names in the Valley and all investors that I love. And very often founders will call me and they'll say, hey, I'm deciding between Kleiner and Lightspeed and Sequoia. How do I make the decision? And I'll talk about the merits of each individual firm or each individual partner if I know them. But ultimately, I always tell them who really loves your business, who really, really wants to win. And that's who you should go with.
Makes total sense. Hey, thanks for sharing that story. That was a killer. Want to wrap up just with a couple rapid fire outro questions that we ask everybody. So you mentioned a few investors already who you loved and who've been instrumental in the journey, but maybe give one person a shout out who other founders should take capital from.
Yeah, one partner that has just kind of blown me away over the years, and I have a lot of amazing investors, is Brent Hill at Origin Ventures. Brent's out of Salt Lake City. Origin, most famously, was the first money in Grubhub, wrote the first term sheet that Cameo ever received. And just kind of time and time again, I found Brent to just be just an amazing voice to listen to, and somebody that his firm, many different times, stepped up for Cameo. And there's been a lot of so many great investors on there, but Brent's one that I just never feels gets enough credit, but he's awesome.
What's one thing you would change about the startup world?
I mean, look, there's so many things that I would change, but probably the number one thing that I would change is I still think the stats on women getting funded it's kind of insane. It's something 97% of venture dollars go to men versus women. And there's a lot of survivor bias on that, and there's reasons why, but it should be easier for women to raise capital.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, what's your number one piece of advice for first-time founders never started a company before?
The number one thing I always talk about is to try to find a company that's really in the middle of your ikigai. Your ikigai is Japanese philosophy. It's the intersection of what are you great at? What do you love to do? What does the world need? And what can you make money doing? And too often, and we're seeing this right now with AI, but I've been around long enough now that I've seen 7 different VC hype cycles, micromobility, AR, VR, crypto, Web3. Just there's always the creator economy. They're always in consumer. It keeps being that next thing that everybody's chasing. And if you're going to win and truly be the best in the world at it, you're going to have to be at it for 20, 30 years. This is you might never build another company if you're going to build the next NVIDIA or something like that. Look at Jensen's story, how long that took and the conviction he needed to have to build what became a super valuable company. Or someone like Jeff Bezos, that one of the things that I love when he talks about is people ask me how the world's going to change in 10 years. I have no idea how the world's going to change in 10 years, but the things I know that will be true in 10 years is my customers are going to want their goods faster and cheaper, right? And if you just work on that for 10 years, that compounding, you're going to build a valuable business no matter how the world changes. And I see too many first-time founders chasing the hot new thing as opposed to doing the thing that they love, even if it's unsexy at the time.
Yeah, I see that all the time. See it everywhere, especially with hype bubbles. Okay, last one. This is a Peter Thiel one that I love. What's something that you believe in that most people disagree with you about?
The contrarian but right opinion.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, probably my most controversial contrarian but right opinion when it comes to startups is that I think that really when I was at LinkedIn, I saw this, and obviously DI has been a huge theme of a lot of the last 5 years. I believe in diversity of thought. I think that other types of diversity are often overrated. And in my experience, I've always seen aligned teams win over like really diverse and maybe fragmented teams. So I think that is, for a long time, that was like one of the like most taboo things you could possibly say in the Valley. And I think that a lot of really good, well-intended initiatives have not played out as well as some had hoped. But I've seen this in sports teams my whole life. I've seen this in every organization I've been in. Like, alignment matters more than having a ton of different opinions. And that's my own personal conviction. And we've got a great team here. We have people that are from a lot of different backgrounds, but the best teams that I've ever had have been really aligned ones.
I completely agree. And I think it's becoming less taboo to talk about it too, which is great. Cool. Well, Stephen, thanks so much for spending some time with me today. I think folks are really going to love this. And where can folks find you aside from obviously running Cameo day to day?
Probably on Instagram, but just follow our Cameo socials are big. My Twitter's at Mr312, Chicago's area code. But yeah, I'm not super active. I'm not a big tweeter, but Instagram's probably the best place, or LinkedIn.
Cool. Thanks, Ben.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. I write up my main takeaways from every conversation and make them available to all of our members at foundingjourney.com, along with a bunch of other perks and more content. If you found this conversation valuable, subscribe to Founding Journey on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite podcast app is. I post a new episode every Thursday. Also, consider leaving us a rating or a review. As a brand new podcast, this is the best way for us to get out there and founders to find us. See you next time.